Welcome back, folks, to another episode of Beyond the Numbers. I'm your host, Chris Thompson, and on this occasion, I'm joined by Andrew Garland, who is an action coach in Witney, Oxfordshire. Now, a while back, I attended a networking group in place of a colleague, and Andrew presented at it. I found myself enthralled as he spoke about business culture, and in particular, zeroed in on a great phrase concerning why the fish rots from the head down. I simply had to get him on here to enlighten us about all things culture. So in this episode, you'll discover how culture is absolutely essential to business success, how things have gone wrong in the past, where culture starts, the key components that make up a great culture, and how to gauge success. Happy listening, folks. Andrew, thank you so much for joining me. Absolute pleasure to see you.
It's my pleasure, Chris. Anytime. Love to get on the airways and talk about the things I like to talk about.
And how are you doing on this rather grey and drab day?
Well, you know, it's the weekend. It's Friday. I love Friday evenings. You know, there's always something for us to look for, but everything's on the horizon. Everything is positive. If we see the day as dull, it's going to be dull. So if you take a positive view, it's going to be positive.
Forget the weather. It's all good.
Exactly.
So perhaps starting this, perhaps you could sort of just give us a bit of a brief background as to you, because you're an action coach, but how did you get to become an action coach? What's the sort of history there, please?
Okay, thanks, Chris. Yes, I'm a senior partner, own the franchise for Witney, West Oxfordshire. It's quite a long story. I started off as an aircraft engineer and very quickly discovered I had this sort of sense for looking at numbers and working with people. And I found myself in people leadership roles and business leadership roles. And, you know, one of the big things that struck me early on was when all my team walked out on me, whose fault was it? And I had to do some really deep diving into actually it was me. And, you know, that insight led me into all kinds of roles. I went back to university. I studied an MBA, MCOM. I looked at all kinds of aspects of business. And starting off as small but meaningful roles, and as an aircraft engineer, I ended up being in senior management roles across all kinds of different sectors. And along that journey, I've sort of taken that belief with me that it all starts in your own mind. And in many respects, a business, an organization is like a human body. The main computer sits at the top, and if it's not running the right subroutine, you know, we're in trouble. So over the course of working through many different sectors, many roles, senior roles, CEOs, MDs, operations directors, sales director, that principle has stuck with me all that time.
Excellent. So obviously today's podcast is primarily around the topic of culture. I'll just give a little bit of background. So we were at a networking group called Open Doors, and I think this was last November, and you gave, I think, what they call an insight, a bit like a presentation, right? Indeed. On a topic that with the header, "The fish rots from the head down." And I was obviously listening to this and found it fascinating and thought that would make a great sort of interview, podcast, vlogcast subject, hence why we're here. So obviously this is all about culture. And I'm assuming that you deal with quite a few clients on this topic. What is it usually, what are the circumstances that usually lead someone to come to you on this particular area of work?
Okay, there's sort of two areas that I find that work comes from me. One is from CEOs, executives running large organizations, and just, you know, the standard run-of-the-mill business owners that are struggling. They don't understand why things are not working. And there's a common thread between the two of them in the sense that with CEOs, they're saying, well, why is my performance not where it should be? You know, I've given them everything they want. I've put the things in place, but nothing seems to be happening. And same from a business owner, a small to medium-sized business owner. They're just looking at it saying, well, what's going on? And that's normally the lead in to the discussion.
Right. So are they looking at, they've obviously invested whatever that investment may be, and they're then looking at the output or the numbers and they don't see the correlation between the two. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, so there's a number of areas. One might be the correlation of actual physical results that the business is looking for. And the other might be, well, this culture doesn't seem right. People are talking behind my back, that we don't get on well, all those sorts of things. So those two areas are the two key drivers for people stopping and saying, okay, well, what do we need to do about this?
And how big is this line of work for you?
Well, I suppose I've been a student for many years, but I've come to the realization this is probably one of the biggest topics in business leadership and business management there is to have. And it really is just like a chip off the iceberg, so to say. Beneath the surface, there is going to be so much development, so much going on in this area, especially for self-development.
Right. Okay. So what you're sort of saying is there's a bit of a culture problem that you can see amongst many organizations, or they identify it themselves, the leaders. Why is it that culture is so important, please, in your opinion?
So let's get something right. There's a bit of mystery around this word culture. Everyone talks about culture this and culture that. Here is the stark reality of this. The culture is a reflection of our thinking and our actions, and especially big organizations. The organizational culture is a direct mirror of how our senior leadership team are operating, how they're thinking, because under stress, under hard times, how we think ourselves is how we act, and how we act, the organization will follow. It's only natural that people follow what we do. So when we're talking about organizational culture in that sense, we've really got to go back to the people that are leading the organization and understand and examine what they're doing. As scary as that might sound, putting a mirror up to people, that's the truth of it.
So in effect, what you're saying is behavior is mimicked particularly when it's coming from the top.
Absolutely. And if there's a lack of consistency across the organization, this is where people take the advantage. Well, not necessarily take the advantage, but they see that there is one rule for one and another for others. And this is probably one of the biggest dysfunctions inside of an organization. So if we take that to a high level, if we're not consistent with ourselves, in other words, what are we saying to ourselves? What are we talking to ourselves about when no one else is around versus what are we talking to people when they are around? I think you'll find in many cases where organizational challenges and cultural challenges, so to say, that's where the root lies.
Right. Okay. And so my feeling, and feel free to correct me on this, is that this has become a bigger and bigger and bigger issue over recent years. I suspect the financial crash all those years ago, 2008, 2009, had something to do with it. I don't know. Do you agree? And what do you think has gone wrong over the years? Because my feeling is maybe in the 50s, there was quite a good business organizational culture where a job perhaps was for life and people were very loyal to an organization. Fast forward 60, 70 years, and we seem to be at the complete opposite end of that. What are your thoughts on that, please?
Yeah, look, that's a great observation. In the 50s and 60s, absolutely, people were employed for life, or they felt as though they were employed for life. Unfortunately, as technology has changed and as economic models have shifted how we think and how we do things, and that's brought about into the business world a different way of thinking. The carrot and stick, we reward them heavily, and if they don't deliver, they're out on the organization. Well, that whole concept is gone, and the whole concept now is actually, let's understand how I can perform better so I can allow others to perform better. And in terms of business owners and executives, the same sort of concept sits there, that when I reach my glass ceiling, the business reaches its glass ceiling. So if we can get people to start thinking about how they're reacting, how people are seeing that, how they're influencing the organizational culture, the feeling of the organization, and the quicker and the sooner those businesses, those organizations, those companies can break through that glass ceiling that they're seeing.
So culture is in effect, or as you were talking about it, is effectively starting with whoever the senior person or leadership is. And it's very much, am I right in saying, a one-on-one coaching or mentoring set of sessions with them? Is that correct?
That's how I see it, and I will state that, there's a lot of books written on this material. This is my opinion on how I see the world, but it seems to be playing out.
Okay. Do you think we're gradually then shifting away from the sort of late 70s, early 80s emphasis on shareholder supremacy and everything is done for shareholders and their investment? Are we gradually getting away from that now?
I think there's a massive move away from the single stakeholder being the shareholder driving everything. If we now look at what's happening in terms of the pollution, the greenhouse effect, all those, there's so many different stakeholders that have an influence or are being influenced by an organization. So if we want to have a steady and strong future with that, you know what, we've got to start thinking about all those stakeholders.
Right.
And more importantly, the old adage of team together we achieve more, that was a great thing that started back in the 70s and 80s. Well, we've gone beyond that now. This is about how we think, how we interact with each other, more than just how the team gets on.
So if we look at those stakeholders, I'm thinking back to your November presentation, which was a while ago. How does that work? Can you run us through that dynamic?
Well, we've got certain investment organizations now are looking at ethical investing.
Yeah.
And, okay, the return on investment is perhaps not as high as the other high return listed companies. But what we are seeing is we're starting to see some of those ethical investing organizations, their returns growing, getting higher. There's more support for those types of organizations who perhaps are ecologically friendly, for organizations that are taking a positive step towards using green energy or renewable sources. There's definitely a shift in that area. And if we also consider our communities who are now becoming more vocal about what they should and shouldn't be buying and why they shouldn't be buying certain products and services. And I think this is all growing. It might seem small now, but it's absolutely becoming an exponential impact upon organizations.
So when obviously you're a leader, obviously you may have shareholders on one side, employees, staff on another, your managers in between. You're potentially faced, obviously every business is different, with a lot of competing different needs. Is that correct?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's how many balls do you have in the air at any one time? You could have 4 or 5, but we don't necessarily have to see it that way. We can see it that way as, these are consultative inputs to us creating the necessary outputs.
Right. Okay. So you're in this line of work. You start, say I come to you and go, Andrew, you know what? I'm really struggling with my team dynamic. The first thing that you're going to do with me is what exactly? Hold the mirror in front of me.
I'm going to get you to hold the mirror.
Okay.
And I'm going to get you to understand what's going on with you. But the second thing I'm going to do, which is going to quite closely follow that, I'm going to do an organizational 360 review of you.
Right.
And what we're going to understand from that, this is not about blame or beating someone up, but it's understanding what is the dynamic going on. And we're going to learn about what people like about you or don't dislike about you, but more importantly, how they feel they can get on with you in the workplace, whether they see you as a strong leader, whether they actually understand their roles. There's a lot of fog out there because people, they're employed in sometimes senior roles, and they're actually not sure what they should be doing or achieving. So gathering all that organizational information right from the driver, right from someone that might serve the coffee or whatever they might do in an organization, we're going to put all that together and we're going to present it in a way that you're going to look at it and you're going to say, wow, is that really going on? Is that what really happens in our business? Now, part of being on that learning journey is to say, you know what, I accept that. So what can I now do? What can the business now do? What can the organization do to address some of those things? And that's a starting point. A lot of the times it's behavioral driven. If your behavior is such, then the organizational behavior is such, and everyone else tends to follow suit.
Interesting. So why, interesting, particularly on that last point, why do so many leaders struggle to see the wood through the trees?
I think, no one at birth is taught how to be a great leader, and no one at birth is actually taught how to do sales either or run a business. And it's one of those things where the more you can learn, the more you put yourself on a learning for a life learning process, the easier it becomes to look at yourself, assess, and become aware, mindful, being present. Actually, one of those things called active listening is lost. If we can just actively listen to the people that are working with us, and understand and hear the message rather than not actively listening and hearing the message that we want to hear.
So it's a bit like confirmation bias.
Yeah, indeed.
So would you say what are the key traits for a great leader, do you feel?
Well, a great leader, as Simon Sinek summarized, I think the other day on LinkedIn, is a visionary. Now,
Right.
if we've got great leaders that are direction orientated, how does the vision, how does the energy, how does the encouragement come from the top if it's just directing? A great leader needs to be the visionary officer of the organization, where someone have actually got something to grab hold of. They identify with it, they see a future, they can see their part in all of that. If we did one thing in every single organization, business, community run, or whatever FTSE listed, if we can just get the vision across to the people, and people, the employees, will either buy in or buy out of it. And those that buy out of it won't work there. Those that buy into it will ultimately deliver the competitive advantage that most businesses are looking for.
So I think Simon Sinek put on LinkedIn, he said, we need to scrap the title CEO, Chief Executive Officer, and have more chief vision officers, CVOs. Is that right?
Yeah, that's what he said. I'm not sure that I agree with changing the title. I think it's more about either changing the people or getting to change people to change the way they think, and getting people to change their approach to serious leadership roles. And if we can graduate above the old carrot and stick or directive styles of some of our CEOs in this country, more towards the visionary thinking where they actually give people something to lock onto, I think we can do incredible things in this country.
So, I mean, we hear all sorts of stories about people like Steve Jobs, Elon Musk. Are you sort of saying, because I mean, to all intents and purposes, they're not necessarily the most forgiving or easygoing with their employees. I think, that there are instances where, Jobs would demand, well, I want a glass screen on it, not a plastic one. Well, that would take years to develop. You've got 2 months. Or Musk, asks, how much will that rear suspension cost? This revolutionary suspension. Oh, probably a few mil. You've got $500,000 and a few days. But they do seem to get away with it.
Yeah, the thing is, it's not about actually getting away with it. As much as we might buy into a vision, we also need challenge in an organization.
Yeah.
And without challenge, we don't break through the comfort zones that we're all residing in, and that can be done in the right way. Of course, setting that almost impossible task actually becomes possible by getting the thinking, the mainframe in our brain thinking about different routes. But if we're not given the challenge at a high level and at a low level, then we're not going to see those things. But examine the vision of those two organizations, and I guarantee you'll see something quite powerful and strong. And if you also start to examine some of the uses of technology and examining the sort of exponential growth of different things happening in the marketplace, combine those two, which those two organizations jumped on, that's what's led to the success.
So they have an incredibly strong vision, and they understand their role in terms of evolving or revolutionizing the marketplace. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely. For example, if you look at the average microtrip, that's doubling its capacity every year. So for over the last 50 years, smart organizations are starting to see that those sorts of changes in technology will enable things to happen, whereas in the past they would have been seen to be impossible.
Yeah, remarkable. So obviously when you go in, you're by the sound of things, you're doing an element of measuring in terms of what the leader's performance is, what the vision is, goals, that kind of thing. Do people understand their roles? Needless to say, then there's a bit of sort of truth telling for those in top positions, which can't be an easy discussion.
Yeah, if a CEO has asked me to come in and engage and understand what's going on, then what you normally find is they're very open to receiving the information. In fact, they're very grateful to get someone to tell them the truth rather than having other people telling them what they think they might want to know. And I think that's where the credibility, that's where the integrity lies, that's where the greatest growth will happen, when those CEOs, those senior executives actually are listening to what is being fed back to them.
Listening to that, what I'm almost hearing you say is you're making them potentially not just more human, but a better human being.
Yeah. Aren't we all put on this planet to be the best of each other, or best of ourselves?
Yeah, well, I'd hope so. It sounds like we all get a bit lost in the fog almost.
Yes, yeah, that word fog is a really, really interesting one. And in a recent webinar we looked at what is the reason for fog. And in many cases, it's just either lack of vision, lack of leadership, lack of a plan, lack of goals, and lack of, let's say, feedback loop inside an organization.
I'm sort of thinking as well, you're saying a business has to have a great vision. But it almost sounds to me like, if you were to add some subheaders under that, listening, intense listening, I think was the sort of phrase you used, and
yes,
and the need for empathy as well.
Absolutely.
To sort of
I think
guide your employees.
I think the term is active listening. It's different from listening.
Yeah.
And this is something that has to be learned. It's not something that people find easy. How often do you find yourself listening to someone and you're passing an opinion in your mind, or you're saying, "Oh, in my own mind, I don't believe this. What's all this garbage about?" Active listening is putting aside and being absolutely present, and it's just allowing what you're hearing to be absorbed.
Yeah. Do you encourage sort of note taking with that?
I tend not to take too much note taking during active listening, because that's just a distraction.
Okay. So just absorbing it in your mind.
Typically, when I work with executives or some senior business managers in that sense, typically, active listening and absorbing it, there will be a question that will come from it, and the power of the questions, the quality of the questions that CEOs asked will actually deliver the quality of outcomes. And inquiry, in the sense of what you're hearing, what's been fed back to you, the inquiry leads the person that's talking down a path of self-appreciation. It leads them down a path of understanding themselves. And what I'm going to say is quite controversial, but understanding yourself leads to a better understanding of the business.
And so when you say understanding yourself, you mean understanding how you've got to this position where they're in front of you, for example?
Yeah, yes, absolutely. And how you can influence an organization.
To how you can improve going forward.
Yes.
Right.
Some of the subtle things that have big meaning for other people.
Okay. What would some of those sort of things be in your experience?
Look, it could be as simple as consistency. you're doing one thing for the senior team and you're doing another thing for perhaps someone else, or saying one thing for one person and saying another to other. That small thing in your mind could have massive implications in the total workforce.
Right. Interesting. Okay. So do you find that where things are at, that basically, is there a shift now taking place where things are going away now from just the end numbers to actually going more sort of, how can I put it, employee and customer centric, and saying if we get that right, then that will take care of the numbers? Is that happening? Is that gradually taking place?
Yeah, there is some shift, but I think we must remain cognizant of the fact that there needs to be some form of performance and performance management and understanding of what that means. Because with the best will in the world, but a company that's not reaching break even or turning over what it needs to can't implement some of those things. But I think that said, there's definitely a move to looking at the customer, looking at what their expectations are, is definitely a big shift in that field. And you've seen that during the COVID and the lockdown period. We've seen people employing a lot more empathy to the needs of people. We've seen a lot more helping hands go out to people to understand their situations. And we've had companies both boom and bust, so equally they've been doing those sorts of things.
Yeah, interesting. And this is the humdinger question. Thinking of culture, when you're putting these processes in place or improving behavior, particularly at the top, how do you measure it? Is it as simple as you start seeing a vision statement? Are there any other things that you look at and go, that is potentially a metric and sign of success?
Yeah, there could be any number of things. Typically a board would be looking for two things, or they'll be looking, well, is there actually a return on investment? And are we seeing some form of gain? That's one thing. And then there's these sort of intangible things. Well, how do we measure organizational culture? How do we measure that? And of course, in the short term, that can be difficult. But if we stick with the 360-degree review process for those senior executives, and if we're starting to see the metrics around those change, and we're starting to get ratings lifting in that area, then what we're saying here is we're getting behavioral shift. And with behavioral shift, we should see the numbers or the other metrics improving that we're attempting to shift.
Can you improve the leadership and therefore the culture of any organization, in your opinion? Or are there some leaders where that's maybe not possible? And I asked that question to give you a little bit of context. I'm thinking, certainly into the 80s and 90s, from what I've read, that a real sort of numbers culture emerged. and the argument, I think, given by the likes of Simon Sinek is it encouraged the sociopaths to take control. Are some leaders beyond reach, or do you think anyone can be taught?
I think to answer that question, I'll answer it in two ways. There are some people that are closed to growing and developing and examining themselves and having someone critique them and sit by them. Those that are open to understanding what they can do to improve, then absolutely we can change, we can help, we can shift any organization. There are some leaders that unfortunately we can't change. It's just their makeup, and there's nothing right and wrong about anyone's makeup. That's just a stated fact. But if we can get the new generation of managers, CEOs, executives coming through that have a different mindset around organizational improvement, starts with improving themselves, then we've come a long way to shift any organization, be it community-based, whether it be government-based, whether it be private enterprise-based.
So your message effectively is change your own behavior to help change the behavior of those under your charge. And that in turn will then take care of the numbers.
Absolutely.
alongside a big vision that
Of course,
inspires
yeah.
everyone to power forward.
Absolutely, yeah. Vision and understanding ourselves. Because if we think about it, where we come from a place where the leader gets up, bangs his hand on the table, blames everyone for failing underneath them, and then replaces them and moves on. Those days are definitely gone. There's a couple of business organisations that work from this country that have absolutely destroyed their business, destroyed the market by taking that approach.
Yeah, okay. So if we were to look at some of today's leaders, not necessarily in the business world, so if we look at America, even the United Kingdom, and maybe France or some of the others, what is your, without getting too political, what is your take on some of these leaders? Do you see a big vision from any of them?
No, not particularly. How's that for an answer?
Well, I mean, I'm thinking, because when you said it, I was thinking, what is the big vision for the UK? And I'm slightly struggling. Post-Brexit world is all I can think of.
Well, I think we've had nibbles. We've had nibbles of this, and releasing the shackles is one part of that vision. Creating a technology-based manufacturing or business-based opportunity is another. We've heard nibbles about all kinds of things. But if we all had clarity on the big vision and how it's broken down, how every person in this country could attach themselves to one aspect of it, because everyone's never going to like everything that's produced, but if they can attach themselves to one small aspect, no matter how small or big that might be, then there's a real opportunity to take the country forward. Now, I'm not a politician, but that's just how it seems to me in business as well.
Yeah, very interesting. Very interesting. So do you think culture has been really tested to the max in terms of, obviously we've been locked down, people aren't face to face as much, if at all. So is there a danger that distance has literally created distance between teams? Are you seeing any of that?
Yes, definitely. If we reflect back in the times where the railways dominated our countries and our businesses to a large extent, and then come air travel, and that completely shifted how we might do business, how we might ship materials and products around the world. Now, I look at it in the same fashion that, if we don't consider the broader and the long-term implications of what we've experienced, having to work from home to look at our businesses in a different way, it's been a really, I hate to say it, it's been quite a sad time. But if we don't look at it from a perspective of what we can learn and how we can now adapt our businesses, not just for the next 3 or 4 or 5 years, but what is the change process that we're going to bring about, that we're always constantly reviewing a new way, a better process. How can we involve our people? How can we involve thought leadership across the organisation? I think that will be of enormous benefit to this country.
Interesting. I'm sort of thinking, if you're an employee, given what we've discussed, if you're an employee, whatever level, is it possible for an employee to slowly start driving change in terms of cultural change from below?
I think there's definitely an opportunity. The danger the employee faces is not being heard. And not being heard means a person's going to disconnect. And they might not outwardly disconnect, but they've disconnected somewhere. And that's the last thing we want. So, having a mechanism to allow that change and reflect upwards as well as downwards is something absolutely worthwhile considering.
Yeah, interesting. So, I mean, could they sort of form a group with like-minded people to gradually drive change from below?
Some of the great businesses or organizations across the world have consultative teams, and the danger of those consultative teams becoming politicized or seeded means they serve another end. But the idea of consultative teams or consultative people across every aspect of the organization, where that consultative organization, everyone comes in on a sort of equal footing, that's hugely powerful if it's used in the right way.
Yeah, very interesting. Very interesting. Are there any other than the likes of Musk and formerly Jobs, are there any other business leaders that you look up to and go, that's a great That's a great character, a great template.
Yeah, there's a lot around. I won't name them, but there is some great uh, organisations or great movements going on, and one in particular that I follow and it excites me about the future is exponential organisations or businesses. And I think you'll find that if someone wants to pick that up and follow, I can give you the details of that. You're going to see where the future businesses are going to come from, and future businesses are not going to own assets. They're not going to have big investment in bricks and mortar. This is going to be data and digitally driven.
That's very interesting. Is that because those businesses because they're digital, they're almost borderline borderless? So does that mean that they can scale so much quicker than the businesses and industries of the past?
Yeah, so if we consider the businesses of the past, where scale meant opening an office, bricks and mortar, and other assets we had to invest in, if that can be flipped on its head, where there's very little investment in terms of bricks and mortar and infrastructure, the new digital ways, especially around the use of data, allows us to scale very, very quickly and fast. And you're seeing, a lot of the leading organizations in private and listed businesses, you'll find that a lot of them are leaning towards that type of business.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think most of the most valuable businesses in the world today, didn't really exist or hardly existed 25, 30 years ago. The speed of scale is immense.
Yeah, if you look at Amazon, you look at iTunes, you look at Apple, they don't own a lot of asset. They sell or move other people's produce.
Yeah, very clever. So given that, and given that it sounds like you're saying there's going to be a hell of a lot more of that going on, I presume things like blockchain, 3D printing potentially even, and all these sorts of things will give rise to more and more of these businesses. That means culture has never been more important, because arguably, and feel free to correct me on this, but there's nothing harder than running a scaling operation. There's so many moving parts and things that the dynamics are changing so rapidly. You need every bit of help as a leader that you can get.
Yeah, and I'll come back to that clear vision. If there's a clear vision and everyone that's involved in that organization is clear, although they understand it is change, but they're bought into it, it makes those sorts of transitions that much easier.
Yeah. Thinking of vision, when do you start with a vision? Have you done any of that sort of work with organizations as to developing a vision?
Absolutely. Yeah, the three key things are vision, which is the picture of what does the business or organization look like when it's finished. The mission, there's a lot of mystery around that. It's simply how we get there, and the values and how we treat each other inside the organization. They're the three key things, and there's no mystery about it. If you boil it down to those simple definitions, you can go a long way.
Does a vision have to be achievable, or can it be something that we're always striving to improve to get to?
Yeah, it could be the penultimate. It could be the absolute best possible outcome. But, normally a vision is something we're always aspiring to achieve. We can have goals. Goals are different from vision. Goals are, in 5 years, we might have this, this, and this, or 3 years we'll have this, this, and this. But the vision might be something bigger than ourselves, bigger than the organization. For example, our vision is we want to be able to positively impact 1 million people by helping 20,000 businesses. And the reason I say that is, imagine the impact you can have on an economy, on communities, if every business in Oxfordshire could employ one more person. Imagine the impact, imagine the abundance we could bring to our communities.
Yeah. So you're right. So it's a lot bigger than just the organization there. You're talking about, society almost as a whole there, and the opportunity that could bring to improve people's living standards if more people employ more people. Yeah, very interesting. Okay. And the mission statement, this is fascinating. Mission is, as you say, I think that's clouded. There's a bit of fog around mission. But Do you find that do leaders need to have their own personal mission statement as well as an organization one?
Yeah, look, a lot of times people struggle with their own purpose in life, and what their why is, and why do we exist? What is the purpose? And there's three different sort of levels of the purpose. One is to be the best of ourselves. Another one might be to leave the world in a better place. When we start breaking that down, once we understand who we are and the contribution we can make, not only to the organisation we're attached to, but also the wider community, then attach a lot more meaning to themselves. And then once we've got meaning to ourselves, vision becomes very, very easy to create.
Right. So you have to start with a mission, and the vision is likely to come off that. Is that right?
No, the vision.
Oh, you've got to start with the vision.
The picture. The vision is the picture
Okay.
of the future. And once you've got a vision, something that you can actually see in your own mind, or draw a picture, or verbalize it, or write it down, and then the process from there is, well, how do we get there? That's the mission. And what are the key things along the way, which are the goals? And what are we going to do? We break it down into the actions.
And values
is how we treat each other.
Behaviours, yeah.
Behaviours,
yeah. Do you find, I mean, a lot of organizations over the years have had values printed up on the wall, but everybody walks past them, doesn't necessarily take any notice.
I work for a very, very large French company, and I work for a very large distribution company in this country, and they had all their values and mission, but no one believed them. No one saw them. They were too heavy and clunky that people couldn't remember them. And now, if you can't remember them, what use are they?
Yeah. So keep them simple.
Keep them absolutely simple. Yeah.
And do they need to be built into leadership decisions? Do they need to be do decisions need to be justified according to the values, mission, and vision? Well, obviously, vision is quite obvious, but
absolutely. So any decision needs to go through a sort of thought process. How well does this? How can we adapt this, or how well does this align to our vision, or how well does this align to the things we're going to do to achieve our mission? And absolutely, they all have to be crucial. They have to be integrated. They can't be just something that's on a postage stamp or stuck on the wall. No, well, we've done that, tick the box, move on. It has to be absolutely integral to everything we do.
Fascinating, interesting. So
especially if you start talking about the values, a lot of organizations will have value statements, spread through cross government, local government and organizations. But are we really employing those? Do we believe, does our mindset allow us to have the headspace to bring those values into what we do every day? And I would suggest that not so much. There are some organizations that do that. There are some organizations that don't.
So decisions in relation to interactions with customers or clients should always take into account, in doing this, are we sticking to our values? ?
Correct. And one of the biggest coaching questions I have when I'm asked a tricky question, well, should we do this and should we do that? And I'll put it right back to them and I'll say, well, what are your values? What would your values say about that? And quite often it's about employee engagement, or should we do this or should we do that with people? And we all know the answers. If we simply ask ourselves, what would our values say about this? What would that state? And you'll have the answer immediately.
So if I think back to the crash, the banking crash, getting back to the banks, it could be argued, therefore, a lack of adherence to values or creation of values was a huge part of the, how can I put it, greed?
Demise.
That led to the demise of the system.
Well, yeah, I suspect that might have something to do with it. The word integrity, honesty sort of spring to mind.
So greed is good is not a value, right?
Yeah, I wouldn't say that.
Fascinating, interesting. So you're doing more of this kind of work with people. It's gradually creeping in, is it? Part of your role?
strangely enough, inside business coaching, we always start with those three things.
Aha,
There has to
interesting.
be a clear direction. Once we've got things clear, then the fog's lifted with people. How do we get on with each other? I've just started to see it at a different level. That it's almost like this is the sort of hierarchy of thinking that needs to be brought into an organization.
Very interesting. So actually, if you're, say, an entrepreneur, you're starting out, yes, you may have your amazing product or service or IT-based service, whatever that may be, data-based. But once you have that idea, next key crucial step is vision, mission, values, and everything else stems off of there, right?
Correct. Absolutely.
Fascinating. So you haven't got that, arguably you've got an organization that might eat itself from the inside out potentially.
Yeah, and it might grow. Things might go, but we want to give ourselves the best possible opportunity to succeed.
Yeah, very interesting. Fascinating. Yeah. So you have to have those essential building blocks in place to make it happen.
Well, let me flip this back to you. Okay.
Uh-oh.
if you're working for a big organization and you didn't believe in the direction they were heading, you didn't believe in the values, the plastic they were pumping into the ground, or the pollution that was a result of that, how would you feel about that organization? Do you think you would help them make it successful?
I'd be wasting my time.
Right. So you
I'd
have
be
the
wasting
answer.
my time getting out of bed in the morning.
Yeah.
Yeah, because we weren't aligned in how we were thinking.
And
So, good point.
Alignment is really, really important, and that's another thing that we do in terms of our executive coaching, is aligning the personal goals with the organizational goals. Now, if they're incongruent, then that leader ain't going to work. It's just not going to work.
Yeah, fascinating. Well, certainly has given me plenty of food for thought, and I really appreciate your time. Is there anything else you want to add to any of that we haven't discussed, that I haven't asked?
Well, I think the only message I would leave is vision, to remove the fog, and awareness of self are the two big drivers of leadership in modern day organizations.
Self-awareness. So seeing how other people see you.
Yeah.
Bit of empathy. Yeah. So we need empathy is a key thing in this whole thing, listening and empathy, and understanding how others are feeling in terms of your actions.
Absolutely.
Right. Yeah. Sociopaths need not apply.
Well, anyone can be changed, or if they have the desire for themselves to be changed.
Yeah. Fascinating.
It starts with how we think. And I suppose another thought to leave yourself and your audience is that how we think is reflected inside the organization. So if our thinking doesn't change, then the organization doesn't change.
So if it's up here,
yeah,
it will become.
It will become. What we think is what we get.
Right. I need to get some big ideas going again. Not necessarily Lamborghinis or anything like that,
though. Well, why not? If that's truly what you want, then why shouldn't you aim to receive it? Why not?
Yeah. No, I think it's vision, isn't it? Mental vision. That's a very interesting point. Yeah. And if just touching on that subject, you'd be thinking that every morning when you get up, whatever the vision may be.
If your passion for what your vision is strong enough, you're going to be visualizing that. You're going to be thinking of it, a lot of the time. If you go back to, I could be careful what I say here, but if you go back to when you're in your younger days and you're attracted to a particular person, there was a certain degree of passion. There was a certain amount of constant thought around that other person you're attracted to. Now, if your vision is that strong when you're thinking about it in that similar fashion, and that might be about structured thought in the morning and structured thought in the evening, to remind yourself, then if those thoughts and passions are strong enough, you will eventually get it.
Yeah, fascinating. Yeah, very good. But in this case, it's more about a vision for the team and the organization as a whole, or in your case, you're actually talking about an impact on society.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
So you're thinking about that regularly throughout the day.
Every waking moment I have is how can I influence businesses to have an impact upon those million people in the Oxfordshire region.
Yeah, brilliant. I think that is a great point on which to end it. And I can't thank you enough. It's fascinating, really interesting. And I really appreciate your time.
My pleasure, Chris, anytime.
Cheers.
Cheers.
A big thank you to my guest for joining us and imparting so much knowledge. If you haven't done so already, then be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Alternatively, you can subscribe to Beyond the Numbers on your preferred podcast app. I'll be back soon with another episode. Do also get in touch with your feedback using the hashtag Beyond the Numbers, and you can tweet me at Thompson CST and at Wellers SME. Beyond the Numbers is a Wellers production.